He sent me a photograph at 11:47 at night. No message, just the image, a hotel ledger, columns of handwritten checkout times going back 40 years. Every single one from the same room. 2:44 a.m., 2:58 a.m., 3:22 a.m. When I called him back, Niran told me he hadn't slept properly. Since the night the pipe burst in his apartment, the night they moved him into room 304. He said it wasn't the presence that unsettled him most. It was the ledger. That every person who had ever stayed in that room left before dawn, and not one of them ever filed a complaint. This story comes from a hotel archivist in Bangkok. He asked me to tell it exactly as it happened. I have everything. The ledger, the newspaper clipping from October 1987, the sister's voice on the phone, the yellow thread on the windowsill, is exactly as he described it to me. The hotel was old enough to have a smell, something between polished teak and damp stone, the kind that soaks into walls over decades and never really leaves. Niran noticed it the moment he stepped off the elevator on the 3rd floor. He rolled his small suitcase to the end of the corridor and stopped in front of room 3. Card was stiff. The door took 2 tsef. The door took 2 tries. Inside, the room was clean. Nothing unusual. A single bed with a white cotton cover. A wooden desk beneath a wall-mounted lamp that threw amber light across everything. A window at the far end, facing the canal. The curtains were already open, though no one had been booked here in over a week. Niran set his bag down and stood for a moment in the middle of the room. It was quiet, but not the quiet of an empty space. It was the kind of quiet that feels inhabited, like a room holding its breath. He told himself he was tired. The reason for his stay was practical. A pipe had burst 2 floors below his staff apartment that morning, flooding the room before he had even finished his first cup of coffee. The hotel manager, Mr. Perrin, had offered him 304 temporarily, just until maintenance sorts it out, 2 nights at most. Niran had accepted without a second thought. He spent most of his days in the hotel anyway, in the basement archive, feeding 40 years of guest records into a scanning system the ownership had finally agreed to fund. He had brought a box of ledgers with him. Old ones, the handwritten kind, from the 1980s and 1990s. He figured he would make use of the quiet. By 9 that evening, he had eaten a bowl of soup from the staff canteen, showered, and settled at the desk with the lamp on and the first ledger open in front of him. The canal outside was still. There was no wind. The water caught the reflection of the streetlights below and barely rippled. He worked methodically, the way he always did. Guest name, room number, check-in date, check-out date. He typed each entry into the spreadsheet on his laptop, row by row. An hour in, he found the first one. Room 304, January 1991. Checkout time, 2:44 a.m. He paused, not alarmed, just curious. A 2:44 a.m. checkout was unusual. He noted it and moved on. 20 minutes later, he found another. Room 304. August 1993. Checkout, 3:10 a.m. He slowed down. He began going through the 304 entries more carefully, skipping the other rooms entirely. Page by page, year by year, the pattern built slowly, like a shape emerging from fog. March 1989, checkout at 2:58 a.m. November 1994, 3:22 a.m. February 1998, 2:07 a.m. Every single guest who had stayed in room 304 had checked out in the middle of the night. Not one had complained. There were no incident reports, no damaged notes, no requests for refunds. Just the timestamp of departure, sometimes neat and squared away, sometimes scrawled as if written in a hurry. And then nothing. They were simply gone. Niran leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The lamp buzzed faintly above the desk. The room was still. He became aware of his own breathing, slow, deliberate, and of the fact that the air around him had not shifted once since he arrived. He closed the ledger. He turned off the laptop. He thought about leaving the lamp on, but decided against it and pressed the switch. The room went dark, except for the weak silver light coming off the canal below. Niran lay on top of the bed covers with his shoes still on. He was not afraid yet. That was the honest truth. He was something else. Alert, maybe. The way you feel just before someone speaks your name. Outside, the water in the canal did not move. He stared at the ceiling and waited, though he couldn't have said what for, until sleep finally found him somewhere close to midnight. He woke at 2:17 a.m. and knew it immediately, the way you know something before you fully understand why. The room was dark. The canal light came through the curtains in a thin strip across the floor. Niran lay still, eyes open, listening. For a moment there was nothing, just the low hum of the air conditioning unit on the wall and the distant sound of a tuk-tuk somewhere, far below on the street. Then he heard it, a single breath, slow and quiet, like someone settling into sleep. It came from the foot of the bed, close enough that he felt the air shift. He sat up. There was no one there. The room was exactly as he had left it. The desk lamp off. His laptop closed, the ledger stacked neatly beside it. The bathroom door stood open and dark. The window curtains were still. He stayed sitting for a long moment. Then, because he was a careful man by nature, he reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The mattress at the foot of the bed held a depression, shallow, about the size and shape a person would leave if they had been sitting there. Leaning forward slightly, maybe the way someone does when they are thinking. Niran pressed his palm against the spot. It was warm. He pulled his hand back. He did not sleep again that night. The pipe in his apartment was fixed 4 days later. He stayed in 304 for all of them. During the days, he worked in the archive as usual, but in the evenings, instead of sorting ledgers, he started making calls. The hotel kept contact records for corporate bookings going back to the early 90s. Phone numbers, company names, the occasional home address for long-term F guests. Niran worked through the list quietly and without telling anyone what he was doing. Most numbers were disconnected. A few went to voicemail. 2 people hung up the moment he mentioned room 304 by number. But a retired schoolteacher named Mali, who had stayed in the room during a teachers' conference in 1996, answered on the 3rd ring and spoke without hesitation. There was a woman in a yellow dress, she said. She was standing by the window when I woke up, just standing there looking out. Niran held the phone tightly. Did she say anything? Nothing. She didn't move. I watched her for, I don't know, maybe a minute. Then I turned on the light and she wasn't there anymore. A pause. I checked out at 3 in the morning. I told myself it was a dream. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. The salesman was harder. His name was listed in a 2003 log. 4 nights in room 304 during a textile trade event. Niran reached him through a company directory. The man listened to the first sentence and then said, very quietly, I'm not going to talk about that room. He ended the call before Niran could respond. That night, back in 304, Niran sat at the desk and wrote down everything he had learned so far. A woman in yellow, a presence at the foot of the bed, guests who left at 3 a.m. and would not say why. He looked at what he had written. Then he looked at the window. It had occurred to him somewhere between the school teacher's story and the salesman's silence that he was not dealing with something that wanted to frighten people. The departures were not violent. There were no screams on record, no broken furniture, no one who had left in visible distress, just a pattern of leaving, a quiet insistence. Whatever it was not trying to drive people out. It seemed, if anything, like it was waiting for something, or someone, like it kept reaching out, each time, to a different stranger, and kept being left alone again before it could finish. Niran folded the paper and set it under the ledger. He turned off the lamp. The room settled around him in the dark, and he had the clear, uncomfortable feeling that it already knew he was the kind of person who would stay. The maintenance reports were stored in brown cardboard boxes, stacked on metal shelves in the far corner of the archive basement. They were not part of the digitizing project. Nobody had asked Niran to touch them. He touched them anyway. It was a Tuesday morning, 11 days after he had first slept in room 304. He nodded. He told himself he was just reorganizing. He carried the boxes one at a time to the sorting table and worked through them, slowly, the way he worked through everything, methodically, without hurry, not hurry. The 1987 box smelled of old paper and something faintly metallic, like rust. Inside were work orders, plumbing invoices, a record of a broken elevator cable that had taken 3 weeks to repair. Ordinary things. He was near the bottom of the box when he found the clipping. It had been folded once and tucked inside a maintenance form. Hidden or simply forgotten, it was impossible to say. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was thin and brown at the edges, the ink faded but still readable. The headline was small. A 2-paragraph item from a local paper dated October 14, 1987. A young woman had been found in the canal beside the hotel in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. Her name was Ploy Saengsri, 24 years old. A seamstress originally from Nakhon, staying at the hotel while she worked a contract job with a garment supplier in the city. She had been a guest of the hotel for 11 days. Room 304. Her death had been ruled accidental. Niran set the clipping down flat on the table and looked at it for a long time without moving. The fluorescent light buzzed above him. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door closed. He read the article again. One line stayed with him. Night staff confirmed her room. Light was visible from the street past 3 a.m. on the night in question. No welfare check was conducted. No one had gone to her door. No one had knocked. He found her family after 4 days of searching. A phone number connected to a community center in a village 2 hours north of Bangkok. And from there, a name passed along by a volunteer who remembered the family. Ploy's younger sister was named Somjai. She was 71 years old and lived with her daughter's family in a house set back from a rice field. Niran called on a Friday afternoon. He introduced himself carefully, told her he worked at the hotel, that he was compiling historical records. He did not mention room 304 by number at first. When he did, the line went quiet. "I know why you're calling," Somjai said finally. Her voice was thin but calm, the voice of someone who had long ago made peace with something hard. Niran asked what she remembered about her sister. "Ploy was always quiet," she said. Not sad, just kept things inside. She went to Bangkok because she wanted to send money home. She was like that, responsible." A pause. "She called me once while she was staying at the hotel. She said the room was nice. She said she liked the window, that she could see the water from the bed." Niran looked at his notes. "Did she seem? Was she all right when she called?" Another pause. Longer this time. "She sounded like someone who had something to say but didn't know how to say it yet." Somjai exhaled slowly. I told her we'd talk when she came home. I thought there was time. Niran wrote that down. His pen moved carefully, as if the words might break if he pressed too hard. Before he ended the call, Somjai said one more thing. Quietly, without drama, the way people say things they have carried for a very long time. She never really left that room. Not really. Niran sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up. The archive was silent around him. He thought about Ploy's light, burning past 3 a.m. He thought about all the nights since then. All the strangers who had woken in that room and felt something unfinished in the air and had simply chosen to leave. He thought about what it means to stay. Niran returned to room 304 that evening with the old ledger, a thermos of tea, and no intention of sleeping. He set the thermos on the desk. He moved the chair from the desk to the window, positioning it so he could see both the room and the canal below. Then he sat down, opened the ledger across his knees, and waited for the city to grow quiet around him. By midnight, the street noise had thinned to almost nothing. The canal below lay dark and flat. The amber lamp on the wall was on, turned to its lowest setting, and the light it made was soft. The kind that doesn't reach corners. Niran was not afraid. That surprised him a little. Over the past 2 weeks, he had expected fear to build into something unbearable, but instead it had settled into something quieter. A kind of seriousness. He felt the way he imagined a person feels when they have finally decided to do something they have been putting off for too long. He looked down at the ledger, at the column of checkout times, at Ploy's name, written in faded ink in the guest register from October 1987. Her handwriting, small and careful, the letters of someone who took care with things. He closed the ledger and set it beside the thermos. Then he said her name aloud. Ploy. He said it simply, the way you say the name of someone in the same room as you, not loudly, not with ceremony. He was not asking for anything. He only wanted her to know that he knew that someone in this room finally knew who she was and why she had stayed. The lamp flickered once, not dramatically. Just a single, brief dip in the light, the way a candle moves when someone walks past it. Then it steadied again. The temperature in the room dropped. Not sharply, not like a door opening to cold air, but gradually the way a room cools in the hours before morning. Niran felt it first on the backs of his hands. He didn't move. He began to speak, quietly, filling the silence the way you might sit beside Samson in a hospital and simply talk. Not because you know the right words, but because saying nothing feels worse. He talked about what he had found, the newspaper clipping, the checkout times, the 2 guests who remembered her, Malay, who had seen a woman in yellow by the window, and the salesman who would not speak of it at all. He talked about Somjai, her sister, and what she had said. She never really left that room. He told Ploy what he thought those 11 days might have been like. A young woman alone in a city that moved too fast. A window facing a canal that went nowhere she recognized. Work that was supposed to be temporary. Grief, maybe, or loneliness. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that just settles in slowly until it's the heaviest thing in the room. No one knocked, he said. I know that. I'm sorry no one knocked. The room was very still. Around 2:40 a.m. The hour that had marked so many departures, the hour that had sent guest after guest reaching for their bags in the dark. Niran poured tea from the thermos and held the warm cup in both hands and stayed where he was. He did not feel something leave. He felt something ease. It was subtle, the way significant things often are. The air in the room shifted. Not colder, not warmer, but different. Lighter. The kind of change you notice afterward, when you realize your shoulders have dropped and you can't remember when that happened. He sat by the window until the canal below began to catch the first grey light of morning. The water, for the first time since he had arrived, moved. A slow, gentle current, carrying nothing, just moving the way water is supposed to move. Niran watched it and felt, quietly and without drama, that something in the room had finally been allowed to rest. He didn't know yet what would come next, but he knew with certainty that it was not his turn to leave. He woke to birds. Not an alarm, not a sound from the corridor, just the small, ordinary noise of birds somewhere near the canal going about the first business of morning. Niran opened his eyes slowly. The room was pale with early light. He was still in the chair by the window, his neck stiff, the empty thermos tipped on its side on the floor beside him. For a moment he simply sat there, adjusting to the fact of morning the way you do after a night that felt long and important. Then he noticed the window. He had latched it before sitting down. He was certain of that. He remembered the specific click of the lock, the way he had checked it twice out of habit. But now it stood open, just slightly, the way a window looks when someone has lifted the latch and pushed it gently outward and then left it alone. The thin curtains moved in the early air coming off the canal. Niran stood and walked to the window. He looked out. The canal below was grey and still catching the last of the night, the surface just beginning to reflect the pale sky above. The street was empty. A single motorbike moved slowly along the far bank, its headlights still on. He looked down at the sill. A thread lay there. Yellow, fine, about the length of his little finger. The kind used in detailed needlework, the kind a seamstress would know by touch. It was placed parallel to the edge of the sill, neat and deliberate, the way you set something down when you want it to be found. Niran picked it up carefully and held it between his fingers. It was real, solid. He stood at the open window for a long time, holding it, watching the canal begin to catch the light. The ledger lay closed on the floor beside the chair, though he had not closed it himself. He took the yellow thread and set it inside the front cover of the ledger. Then he packed his things, slowly without rushing, and left room 304 for the last time, just as the hotel was beginning to wake around him. He spent 3 weeks writing Ploy's story. He worked in the evenings at his desk in the restored apartment below, using everything he had gathered. The newspaper clipping, the guest logs, the notes from his conversations with Mali and Somjai, the checkout times going back to 1987. He wrote it plainly and carefully, the way he did everything, making sure each fact was correct and each person was treated with dignity. When it was finished, he submitted it to the Bangkok City Cultural Memory Archive, a small organization that collected stories the city had lost track of. They accepted it within a week. A researcher there wrote back to say they had been looking for documentation on the garment workers who had come to the city in the 1980s and found almost nothing. Ploy's story, she said, was one of the first they had. Niran read that email twice. Then he filed it in a folder and went to make coffee. At the hotel, the change was quiet and without announcement. Mr. Perrin removed room 304 from the booking system on a Thursday afternoon. He did not explain it to the front desk staff in writing. He simply took it off. When a junior receptionist asked why, he said only that the room was being kept for maintenance purposes indefinitely. No one pressed further. It was not, Niran believed, about fear. It was about the small, imprecise weight of knowing something and deciding to act accordingly. He settled back into his routine. Archive work in the mornings, tea in the afternoons. The apartment was dry now, the repaired pipe invisible behind freshly painted plaster. But on certain mornings, when the air was still and the light came in low over the canal, Niran would open his window and rest his arms on the sill and watch the water move. He thought about all the things a city swallows in its rush forward, all the names that get written in ledgers and then buried in boxes in dim basements, all the lit windows that no one stops to check. And then he thought about a yellow thread on a windowsill, set there with care. Some things, he had learned, find a way to remain. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.